Pontiac Fiero. Produced from 1984 to 1989, the Pontiac Fiero was a cool little two-seater that kind of looked like a Ferrari that got hit with a shrink ray. It unfortunately had a shrunken version of Ferrari performance with low horsepower in Line 4 and V6 engine options. Engineers had hoped to drop a small block V8 into them, but GM didn't want a two-seat competitor for the Chevrolet Corvette. Instead of being marketed as a performance car, the Fiero hit dealerships as a fuel-efficient, lightweight commuter car, which thankfully never became a real vehicle class. The other issue with Fieros was that they tended to catch fire, with 1 out of 50 bursting into flames. Despite the issues with the Fiero, it has gained a cult following with modders beefing them up with power, making them the sports cars they should have been all along. AMC AMX. Many consider the AMC AMX a muscle car or even a pony car, but with only 2 seats and performance from bumper to bumper, it's a sports car all the way. As a more compact version of AMC's popular Javelin model, the AMX was made for 3 years from 1968 to 1970 and offered an affordable, high-powered, sporty ride. With a base price of under $3,500, it was easily $1,000 cheaper than a Corvette and just as fast. Despite having a serious 390 cubic inch V8 under the hood, sporty styling, and affordability, the AMX never really caught on with the public, selling less than 20,000 units in 3 years. Like many cars that weren't fully appreciated in their day, the AMX has gained a following, and, according to Hemmings, collectors are now snapping them up left and right. Buick Reatta. There are sleeper cars that are unassuming rides with hidden power, and then there are slept-on cars like the Buick Reatta that could blow doors off if anyone bothered to buy one. Buick intended for the Reatta to be its halo car, meaning a flagship model that would bring attention and prestige to the brand, but it was a flop. The Reatta was slated for a production of 20,000 cars per year, but ended up only moving a total of 21,751 in 4 years. It's a shame it never caught on because it was a great 2-seat sports car. Not only was it sharp-looking and peppy, it was loaded with features including a touchscreen command module that controlled interior functions and provided vehicle diagnostics, which was wild at the time. Dodge Stealth. The Dodge Stealth is another American sports car that deserved more love than it got. The joint venture between Mitsubishi and Dodge produced not only one of the coolest-looking rides of the 1990s, but also a high-performance sports car that was years ahead of its time. Things like anti-lock brakes and all-wheel drive are commonplace now, but in 1990 they were radical standard equipment on the Stealth. The Stealth wasn't just an awesome-looking car with cool features, it was a legitimate performer with a 300-horsepower twin-turbo V6. This was the kind of power Detroit hadn't produced since the classic muscle car era, and it was available in an early 90s sports car. Studebaker Avanti. The name Studebaker sounds like a fuddy-duddy brand, but the truth is, the now defunct automaker has been on the cutting edge and ahead of the curve since the beginning. They made an all-electric car in 1902 and were cranking out muscle cars in the 1950s. Then, in 1962, they came out with a radical space-age speedster, the Avanti, which was also a proto-pony car before the Mustang. Classic Motorsports tells us that the Avanti was marketed as America's fastest production car, and backed that claim up by recording 29 new stock car speed records. Only around 5,800 were ever produced, but it wasn't a case of the car bombing. The Avanti had a 129-piece fiberglass body that took forever to assemble and fit. The Avanti was discontinued in 1963, but has been revived by other companies until as recently as 1999. Saturn Sky. The Saturn Sky is the same thing as the Pontiac Solstice, but the Sky makes the list because Saturns hardly ever rank, and this was a kick-ass 2-seat roadster. Every bit as sporty and fast as similar European and Asian subcompact sports cars, some people are still struggling to wrap their heads around the fact that this was a GM vehicle. The Sky and its sister car, the Solstice, were well received for being stylish performance cars without shocking window stickers, but they were both done in by the deaths of their parent companies. Both Saturn and Pontiac ceased operations in 2010, and sadly, GM didn't shift the Sky and Solstice to another division. People would have still bought a Chevy Sky or a GMC Solstice. Ford Thunderbird. Ford marketed the Thunderbird as a personal luxury vehicle, but it was a top-off two-seater that was fun to drive, so it qualifies as a sports car. There was no room in it for kids or groceries, and it had a spunky V8 under the hood, so by the process of elimination, it was more sporty than luxury. Also, it was Ford's response to the successful Chevrolet Corvette, so there's no question that it intended to be a sports car. Introduced in 1955, the car was instantly hot, not with the traditional luxury vehicle crowd, but with younger drivers. Ford chose to ignore the adage of, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," and the first gen only lasted a couple of years before the T-Bird was slowly morphed into a ridiculous land yacht by the late 1970s. After spending the 80s and 90s as an ugly Taurus knockoff, it briefly returned to a sports car in the 2000s. But nothing beats the original model. Shelby Cobra. Technically, the Cobra is a British car, originally produced by UK company AC Cars, but it has also been produced in America, and more importantly was made both famous and awesome on this side of the pond. Racing legend and car designer Carroll Shelby approached AC with the idea of putting a V8 into their cars, and after Chevrolet declined to provide an engine, started packing the Cobras with Ford power. The Cobra was redesigned and manufactured in conjunction with the Ford Motor Company. After trying a few decent engines, Shelby finally settled in with a massive 427, creating the ultimate street machine at the time. For reasons that seem bizarre to collectors now, the Cobra 427 was a failure, causing Shelby and Ford to discontinue it in 1967. Only 998 Shelby Cobras were built, but it is such an amazing ride that a kit car industry was born, putting thousands of replicas on the street. This reworked British import is one of the most iconic American sports cars and is synonymous with U.S. track and street performance in the 1960s. Dodge Viper. The late 1970s and most of the 1980s were some dark times at Chrysler for designers who had to apply their creativity to awful K cars and soulless minivans. As a reward for suffering through Aries and Caravan hell, the Dodge design team was allowed to come up with a modern version of the Cobra. It was never intended to go to production, just be an exercise in design skill, but the resulting Viper was so amazing it couldn't be denied. Originally built on the cheap, the original 1991 Viper lacked modern safety equipment like anti-lock brakes and traction control, but also didn't have side windows or cup holders. After making a huge splash, successive generations were better equipped, both in features and performance. The Dodge Viper was an instant classic, and while it is the ultimate American performance car, it can't quite claim the greatest sports car because of the ride that started it all. Chevrolet Corvette. The importance of the Chevrolet Corvette cannot be overstated, as both the greatest American sports car and arguably the most iconic model from any U.S. automaker. Even the design was a risky undertaking, because there was no indication that the market for a two-seat American sports car even existed in 1953. The gamble paid off as the Corvette has been in continuous production for 70 years. Through 8 generations, the Corvette has always represented the height of American engineering and performance. The Vette has been celebrated in song by artists from the Beach Boys to Prince and became a superstar in movies and TV, most famously in the Route 66 series. Road and Track's Thomas Bryant proclaimed the Corvette America's favorite sports car and noted that after all these years, it's still an attention-getter.